just the economic measure of production, the GDP type of numbers. So in this slide that you're looking at up there, we have GDP started as a subset, and this movement to add alternative indicators for well-being has sort of started to expand on that. So we have economic well-being, enough time to have leisure time, some wealth. Now the living conditions, do I have a good environment? Do I have good health? Do I have education? Do I have arts and culture? Now we start to expand it out further, and we have family and friends, work satisfaction, community ties, and we start to get to bigger and bigger sets that are really talking about real well-being. So the genuine happiness indicator has developed 9 domains of happiness. And these are like just areas in which we can discuss the idea of well-being or happiness. And we've started to learn to apply these in things like the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations to become measures for progress and for development. So these are essentially asking people questions. One example might be, how safe do you feel walking home in your community after dark? 0 to 10. If you left your wallet on the street in your community with $200 in it, and a neighbor found it, what's the likelihood that you think you'd get it back? If a policeman found it, what's the likelihood that you think you'd get it back? So from these kinds of psychological questions, you begin to get data that tell you how people are feeling about their lives in their communities. So instead of measuring things like, oh, we delivered 3,000 hours of service in this community, and was there any outcome? Did anybody's life improve? Don't know. We start to be able to ask questions like, have we really changed the well-being of people in the community? And this well-being might be in these different areas. It might be in the area of environment. It might be in good governance. Good governance plays a role in making people happier or less happy. We've discovered also through the last 10 years, the new science of positive psychology has enabled us to start thinking more and more about what creates happiness. What kinds of things can you do in a community that can create more of an opportunity for well-being. So as we've started to do that, we've done some simple things, like you take 2 college students, you give them each a $100 bill, and you ask one person to give that money to other people during the day or spend it on them, and the other one you say you have to spend it on yourself. You bring them back into the lab at the end of the day, and you know what? The one that gave the money away shows up happier. And you know what? We can repeat this time after time after time. So it's a repeatable scientific experiment that you can do. You go in and you look in the dopamine levels in the brain, and you say, oh, consistent with happiness and pleasure. Oh, you see that the areas in the prefrontal cortex that are hardwired for altruism and cooperation are lighting up. They've become active. So what you can see is we've started to learn the kinds of things that make people happier. And those are things like volunteering, doing things for a greater good, a greater cause, spending time with your family and friends, doing cultural things, community vitality. Do you have a vibrant community that's growing, that's got local food movements going, there are jobs, things to be done? All of these things we start to see are things that we can have some influence on, both as governments, as societies, as communities, and as individuals. So this is an area of the gross national happiness, and this is a model that we're developing with people all around the world who are also doing this. This is being tried in Brazil, variations on this in the United Kingdom. France has adopted something like this. Canada has a Canadian Index of Well-Being. More and more countries around the world are starting to adopt this as a measure. The United Nations in July 2011, passed a resolution in the General Assembly unanimously with 68 countries sponsoring it, that all countries should start to develop well-being measures for development in their countries, and they should share their results with other countries so that they can all learn how to do that. So that's sort of what's happening. GNH USA, we consider ourselves a network of networks. We cover the entire country, but we're based just over the mountain in Waitsfield. So we're a local organization here in Vermont, and we have this project, Vermont as a Lab, which all of the things I'm going to talk about today are, like in the last talk, things that are real and on the ground and already working, that people are learning from. They're not finished products, but they're work in progress, and they're growing. So here's a simple well-being set of indicators that were developed by the Gallup Healthways organization, which essentially does 1,000 telephone surveys in every state every year. And now they've expanded it to about 130 countries around the world. So we're starting to get lots of data about well-being. And you can see the kinds of things that are being measured here. And you can see you've got 2010 and 2011, and on the right-hand side, you see the rank of the states among the 50 states. And you see, again, 2010, you see, for example, that in healthy behavior, we were number one in 2010 and number 3 in 2011. So we're really good on healthy behavior here in Vermont. But our work environment went from 31st to 2nd. So what went on then? We actually tried to figure out what had happened there, because it went from like 2nd to 31st the year before. The best thing that we could figure out was that it's generally believed that Vermont's economy lags by a year or two the general national economy. So when the great crash hit in 2008, it was really more like 2010 before it got to Vermont, and we felt the brunt of that. So we think that that's where that came from. But you can see you can learn some interesting things, and these data start to ask interesting questions. Okay, this is the Gross National Happiness Survey. We did some town meeting work around in 2011. Just a preliminary study. You can see there are 6,000 total responses. Vermont, we just had 274. But you see the 9 categories of well-being that we showed before. And you can see Vermont ranks pretty well, but that little town, Decorah, Iowa, is actually ranking better than Vermont. And I have to say, when I saw that result, I said, what? We're not number 1? So I had to do some research on Decorah, Iowa. And I discovered that it's a small college town in a farming community. It has a rural aspect to it. It has a nice small town feel, but it has all the art and culture and things that this college being there brings. So maybe if we did some more research, we'd understand why that was a conducive environment. And I was mentioning earlier today that China is also doing some research on this. And what they decided to do was they built a happiness city from the ground up, with the idea being, what are all the things that we can do to create an environment to create the maximum amount of happiness for the citizens of this new city. So this is an experiment that's happening right now as well. One of the other things that's come to Vermont, sort of separately from our work, but became part of it as we got a grant from the Vermont Community Foundation to develop a Vermont Data Collaborative. So in collaboration with the Gund Institute for Ecological Economics at UVM, Common Good Vermont, which works on increasing the capacity of nonprofits in the state, and Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, which has got a federal grant to teach results-based accountability to nonprofits around the state. And what this is a very interesting thing. It's really measuring outcomes, as we saw in the previous set of slides from the speaker before. And instead of measuring procedures given, we're looking for the actual outcomes, both at the population level in a community. Can we see that something has changed in the individuals living in this community? If we see that actual level of change, then we know we've done something. And if we repeat the measures over time, then we can see over time whether we're continuing to turn the curve in the direction we would like, or whether in fact we're, going in a direction that's not turning the curve, but things are getting worse. So results-based accountability, the governor of Vermont and the state administration are completely involved in an effort to build this climate of accountability so that what the government does becomes transparent and reportable, and you can see whether they're turning the curve or not. So in the last 6 months, over 400 people have been trained in how to use results-based accountability in Vermont. There's now 24 trainers trained, so a support network is growing. The Agency of Human Services and the Department of Health are piloting using this kind of system to produce a regular scorecard for these agencies working in Vermont. And interestingly enough, this is exactly the same technology as was adopted 20 years ago by the Agency of Human Services when Con Hogan was the agency head. And so there's quite a bit of enthusiasm to see this kind of data coming back and be used in Vermont, particularly the nonprofit organizations, community organizations working on the ground are very anxious to have that regular scorecard showing them how things are going in those communities, because you can spot trends, and if you see a downtrend, you can say something's going wrong, let's fix it. And it's about being able to apply feedback to complex human systems. And you need to know where the leverage points are, and then figure out how to turn those curves, and then measure it to see if you are in fact turning the curve. Okay, there's something called the genuine progress indicator, which, as you can imagine, means there must be a fake progress indicator. And we might suggest that that was called the gross domestic product, GDP. So what this does is it fixes our state accounts. Our GDP, gross state product, are things that have measured just the economics, and it's really either production or consumption that's at the base of that. But it has left out externalities, and we've moaned about this for 30 years plus anyway. And these externalities are little things like you cut down a forest, you sell the trees, and all you count is the value of the lumber that was sold. The fact that you've lost the value of the ecosystem services of those trees collecting water and retaining it in the soil, the fact that the leaves convert carbon dioxide into oxygen and sequester the carbon dioxide, the fact that they're habitat for animals and birds and insects and things, and the fact that we like them. All of those things have been ignored. And so the genuine progress indicator is an attempt to put those externalities back into the state accounts so that we get a genuine measure of whether we're really making progress or whether it only looks like progress because we didn't count all the costs. So you'll see in here under environmental, you see costs of water pollution, costs of air pollution, net wetland change. And net wetland change, if you invest in repairing wetlands, the value of your wetlands goes up. So what they've done is they've tried to convert some of these things that aren't explicitly economic into having some kind of an economic value, so you can essentially see this as an extension to GDP. And you have some social things. The value of household work is costed because your house is better after you've painted it. The value of volunteer work, never been accounted for before. Cost of lost leisure time. Oh, your health's going to be not so good because you're working too hard. The value of having streets and highways that enables commerce and travel, and things like that. All of these things. So last May, the state legislature passed a bill authorizing the development of a genuine progress indicator for Vermont. And the Gunn Institute of Ecological Economics is developing those indicators. So I expect we'll hear more about this as the spring goes on and we start to use this. And the governor has created something called the Vermont Governor's Dashboard. And what that is it's simply a place where you can go, like the dashboard in your car, to see critical information that will help you understand how things are going in your environment and in agriculture, in jobs, health, energy. So we can start to imagine a populace that becomes more data literate, that starts to have access to important data about policy decisions and so forth with the state. And through the Genuine Progress Indicator and through the Governor's Dashboard and through the GNH Indicators and so forth, we'll be better enabled to make good decisions for the outcomes we want in the future. Now, that's not Governor Snelling here, but last year we asked him to proclaim Thomas Jefferson's birthday as Pursuit of Happiness Day. Because we can thank Jefferson and Ben Franklin also for the line in our Declaration of Independence which says we have an unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because Adams and some of the other people at the group that was writing the Declaration of Independence wanted to say pursuit of property. So we ended up with pursuit of happiness, which I think we would all agree is a happy turn of events. And so we ought to use that. So we helped coordinate something last year called the Pursuit of Happiness Day, which actually there was a celebration here at Middlebury College and at UVM and at a certain tavern in downtown Burlington, where the proclamation was read and about 75 economics students stood up and cheered. So anyway, we expect to do the same thing this year and every year on April 13th. So I just invite you to please pursue happiness on that day. And www.gnhusa.org is where you can find lots of information and plug into a national movement on this. Local things that you can do, internships, research, and other things like that. And I'm going to stop now and take questions. Yes, Mark.
I have a question regarding the issue of visibility of the new economy that I think both Bob and also I'm blanking on the name of
Bill McKibben.
Bill McKibben, thank you so much.